Hi friends, Lorelei Black here from Blade Broom, and this week we are going to be talking about Scythe magic, which is a Norse form of magic, and how it relates to seething and hedge crossing in witchcraft. So stick around. Friends, I really tried to time this so that there wasn't going to be a lot of noise interference, but my neighbor is shoveling a very icy driveway and you're going to hear it. Sorry. So first off, let's have a really super brief discussion about what hedge crossing is. Essentially, hedge crossing is the trad crafters or the hereditary crafters, or just sort of like a favored new term of all crafters way of saying trance work or spirit journey work. So the hedge itself is a visualization of a barrier between this world and other worlds. So when we cross the hedge, we are crossing into other realms of existence in order to accomplish some type of goal. There are other names for this that people use, including spirit flight or soul flight, or just trance work or journey work. So you'll see all kinds of other terms being used. Hedge crossing sort of speaks to the English traditions that a lot of us are drawing from. And one of the reasons that using the hedge as a symbol or as an allegory does that is because you would often have this sort of wild, thorny hedge that surrounded a property or might have surrounded part of a village in order to keep the wild things from the woods, from the wild and untamed forest out, and to serve as a protection and a barrier for the people dwelling within that homestead or within that village. So with hedge crossing, we're actually trying to get on the other side of that hedge to go and be where the wild things are. But of course, as witches, we know ourselves to be among those wild things. There are so many ways to accomplish hedge crossing or to accomplish trance work and journey work. And because we live in an information age, we have been sort of inundated with approaches to this from Eastern traditions, from Western traditions, Northern, Southern traditions, like from all over the globe. We have new ways of being able to do this deep trance soul work. So what I'm going to be talking about, since we have so many things to draw from, this episode is going to be focusing on how the Northern European traditions, so those areas of Europe that we typically think of as being Norse. So that's going to be Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, the North. How those spiritual traditions and magical traditions have informed the way that British witches, continental witches of the Middle Ages, and then also today, how people who identify as traditional witches are approaching hedge crossing and seething, which is a word that we can see very much related to Seidhr or Seidhr from the Norse. Okay, so we're going to be talking about tools, techniques, and purposes for seething and for Seidhr, and why you would go about doing this, how you would go about doing this, and what you might use in order to go about doing this. Among the tools that we see being referenced in the prose and poetic Eddas and the sagas and the material that's coming out of the Northern European tradition, along with things that we find in archaeological dig sites and that type of thing, physical evidence that we have that shows the evidence of magical and religious practice, spiritual practice in the Northern traditions. We see a few kinds of things popping up that also pop up then again in our current spiritual practice of seething and trance work and hedge crossing. So, in no particular order, one of the things that we see is entheogens. Entheogens are substances that are eaten, smoked, imbibed, somehow taken into the system in order to create an altered state of consciousness. We would think of them today as drugs, but they are very specifically sacramental drugs that were used in a religious or spiritual context. So the word entheogen actually means references taking the gods or the God inside of oneself. So to have God indwelling within you. And one of the ways that this has always been accomplished throughout human history and across the cultural experience is by chemically altering one's state of consciousness. We see examples of entheogens being used all over the globe, including in things like alcohol, ointments, other kinds of herbal preparations like tinctures and smokes, and you name it. If there's a way to ingest it, we've figured out how to do it. And we've usually, those hallucinogenic plant allies that help us reach those points of gnosis, we usually regard with an air of caution. Those entheogenic plant allies we usually approach with an air of caution because they're often poisonous or toxic on some level. It's part of how that they're affecting our brain chemistry in such a way as to induce hallucinations and altered states. But we have to use them very carefully, and so there are often a lot of taboos around them and warnings around them because they can also very much induce death. A lot of them do. So the path of the poisoner is one that requires very careful study and apprenticeship with a knowledgeable teacher. So among the entheogens that we see in the north, in northern practice, are things like we find henbane seeds and cannabis seeds, actually like in the pockets, or pocket is probably a wrong word, but like the bags, the putzy bags, the little pocket bags of the pouches of magic workers. So we know that using these things was part of inducing the state of being able to see. It was part of the preparation, or it could have been one of the parts of preparation. There are two types of entheogens that are commonly referred to in witch lore, sort of Central and Western European witch lore, and that is the Sabbat Wine, which may be an actual wine that you would drink that had herbs infused into it, or it may have been sort of a tincture of herbs that you would apply to the skin or that you could consume. And then there's a related entheogenic compound that we refer to as flying ointment that you often see called something like that, green salve or green ointment, flying ointment. And it was, again, made with often a lot of the same kinds of compounds that we see, including henbane, that we see being used in other practices. So entheogens aren't necessarily consumed or used every single time a person hedge crosses, and indeed a person can hedge cross without ever using entheogens. So I don't necessarily want to sit here and go, drugs are bad, okay, and you shouldn't use them. But I do think that if you're going to incorporate any kind of sacramental compound or entheogenic substance into your rituals, you should have a pretty good understanding of what to expect. And you should also have a safety in place, meaning somebody who is not consuming the entheogens, who's able to physically look out for you and make sure that you're doing okay. This is actually something that we did see in, again, ancient Northern European practice, classical, old Northern European practice, was the idea of guardians that were looking out for the physical well-being of the shaman or the Seithkona or the Seithman while they were journeying. Whew, all right. Seems like a good place to have a reminder from Reminder Lorelei. Hi friends, I am just jumping in here really fast because I wanted to say hi and welcome to friends both old and new. Thank you so much for joining us for this particular video and just to the channel in general. I'm so excited about the growth that we're having. Thank you so much for being a part of that. And also, I have a couple of really quick announcements that I want to get out there. One is that the channel now has its very own Patreon page, so check that out. It is patreon.com/bladeandbroom, super easy to find, and super easy to help support us in any way that you are able if you are interested. Another really quick thing is that the Red Thread Academy of Traditional American Folkloric Witchcraft is finally available with its first full course, which is like a whole year of study. And it's a way for you to study with me directly. And I mean pretty directly. So you can just buy the book if you're interested and just do it on your own. I'm cool with that. But you can also, if you would like, purchase the book and then join the Facebook group that I have set up for that and interact with other people who are also taking the course. And that is available in my Etsy shop, which is linked down in the description box below. So lots of options. There are other things that I'm getting up to down in my link tree, including writing for OOAK publication every month. It is a fantastic deal, $3 a month, gives you access to lots and lots of witchy and pagan lifestyle articles and all kinds of goodness. And of course, I'm writing about traditional witchcraft, so it's a good time. And there's more, but I'll stop there now and just say, like, subscribe, do all those things, share. That all helps out the channel and helps me get even better stuff out to you and be able to interact in lots of different ways. So, you know, like, ding the bell, do all those things. And back to the content. Hey, thanks for that reminder, Lorelei. Now let's get back to this. Another tool that is very much part of the Northern European practice that we see very much included in traditional witchcraft and general witchcraft practices is the cloak or the hood, something to shroud the body, sort of physically cover yourself away from other things in the environment to sort of give you your own boundary space, your own barrier against what else might be going on around you. And then also something that would come over your eyes to help hoodwink you in the sense that, not that somebody's going to be leading you around in that state, but so that you can be in a world apart. We see evidence of trance workers, of magic users, sitting in the middle of a group of people, but wrapping themselves in their cloak and their hood, pulling their hood over their eyes, wrapping themselves in a bear skin, or doing something along those lines, again, in the texts and the lore from the North. And we very much see the use of hoods and cloaks and that type of thing within contemporary witchcraft usage as well. And it's not just for the aesthetics of, look at me, I'm wearing a cape. It's, or even just for the practical aspects of, I want to keep the cold night air off of me. It's also sort of the mantle of the deity, of the office, and a working tool that you would use to protect yourself and create that liminal space for yourself within possibly the hubbub of things that are going on around you. Probably the most famous tool of Seidhr work, of the vulva's work, is the stav, or the staff. It is the riding pole. It is the magic wand. It is the world tree on some level, and it is the horse on another level. So it becomes Yggdrasil, it becomes Sleipnir. It is, it harkens to both. It is called the witch's steed in many references, including within Norse references. A lot of times it was visualized as an animal or as a spirit. In fact, the word that's associated with the stav itself, with the magic staff, is also very much associated with the familiar spirit, an animal spirit that would come and guide and guard and protect you while you were doing otherworldly work. And that word is Gandr. And we see lots of iterations of this word, lots of variations of this word, but Gandr, Gandry, Gander, Mother Goose and her very fine gander, which we have mentioned before here on the channel is very much a reference to the pole itself, whether that's a staff, a stang, or a broom in a witchcraft context. And it's also a reference to the animal spirit that you might be flying or riding upon to journey into that other world. That stick, that very special magical stick, whether it is a wooden stick, a wooden staff, or an iron staff, usually a shorter iron staff that looks like a distaff, that looks like this kind of distaff, as a matter of fact, is an inspirited tool. It is not just a hunk of metal, it is not just a chunk of wood, it is something that has a spirit attached with it. And it's not going to be effective for the witch, for the Seidhr, for the vulva, unless there is that spirit connection to it. If you haven't already checked it out, I've done a whole video already on how the vulva's stav connects to the witch's stang, and I would encourage you to check that out in the card that's up there. And I'll also put that link in the description box down below. So really there could be a lot of other sort of idiosyncratic or personal tools that are used, or regional tools that are used, both in Northern tradition and in our contemporary traditions that we practice now. But those three, Entheogens, cloaks or hoods, and the stav or the staff, the gondry, are sort of the three most visible, most present, most widely used that come out of the Northern tradition and are still very much central to the work of seething and flying out hedge crossing today. So now that we have a sense of what the tools are, let's talk a little bit about what the techniques would be, what kinds of skills that you might want to develop and work on in order to actually use those tools to get you in spirit from here to there. So I'm only quickly going to mention the foundational tools of grounding and centering, cleansing, aligning the three souls, sort of orienting yourself within your space, and other things that might be central to your traditions practice or to your particular idiosyncratic way of practicing. But those things are crucial before you go trying to leave your body and going somewhere else. You want to be able to do those things consistently before you launch yourself out of your skin to go roaming around the worlds. So let's say you're in your compass. You have laid your compass, you're in your sacred circle, your sphere, your sacred protected space, whatever that looks like for you, your gateway ring, whatever you're calling that space, you're in it. And you have with you an entheogen of your choice. Let's, for this example, say that that is a horn of mead and or a glass of whiskey. Something to help loosen and lubricate the connection between your body and your spirit and your soul. And let's say that you have your hood or your cloak and you have your staff. So you have these tools, you're ready to go, you know how to ground and center. What do you do now? You can use movement. It is probably one of the most frequently described actions that we see within seething, within seithe work. So to seethe means to boil. Like that's what this word sort of boils down to, pardon the pun. So what we're trying to do is trying to get our spirits boiling and bubbling within the sort of cauldron that is our bodies, in order to generate this magical action of being able to leave, to be able to go elsewhere. In theory, you can do this lying flat on your back and not moving. You don't have to be able to get up and move around to do this. A lot of folks are able to achieve it through visualization techniques, through breath control and breath work, being able to relax and then tighten different parts of the body simultaneously. So while you're contracting one area, you're relaxing another area to be able to control the blood flow. So it's very possible to do that while you're lying down. But for a lot of people, lying down means going to sleep. And I have known so many folks who have been like, every time I try to do trance work, or every time I try to do a guided meditation or any kind of journey work, I just crash out. I fall right asleep. My suggestion to you is don't lay down for it. You don't have to. You don't have to technically close your eyes, but blocking out that sort of visual stimulus from all around you is helpful. That's why the hood is helpful. But you can work with the hood on and still be able to see the ground without necessarily compromising your ability to fly out, without making it so that you can't leave. So try sitting up. You can sit up crisscross applesauce, you know, with your legs crossed. But if that's uncomfortable for you, if you have a hard time getting up and down from that position, you can also sit in a chair with your feet flat on the ground to help you be grounded, and your palms on your legs. And this, getting used to using this position might also help really trigger your brain that when I'm sitting like this, which is not necessarily a way that people customarily sit all the time just for comfort, that you're preparing for trance work. From there, from that sitting position, you could then rock or sway. So you might even use a rocking chair so that you can rock back and forth, or you might use a stool, like a tripod stool, which has some very classic connections to trance work and to journey work, to oracular work, the tripod does. Or you might try sitting on a stump or something like that outside. And you can sort of sway around in a circle, back and forth, side to side, however spirit moves you, however your spirit is moving you, because it's your spirit that you want to move to eventually leave. You don't have to be sitting, though. So don't think that you have to stay stationary. There are, again, a lot of accounts that show the Seidhman, or the Seithkona, up and moving around, holding on to their stav, and circumambulating within the sacred space, you know, moving around in a circle, sort of dancing within that circle, turning circles within the circle, running within the circle in order to create a frenetic energy, in order to, again, sort of loosen the body from the spirit so that the spirit can achieve flight. So often that will end kind of abruptly at some point, where the dancing will stop, the frenetic energy will stop, the shaman or the magic worker, the Seithkona, the witch, will go to their knees, fall to the ground, sit down. Maybe they cover themselves again if they have been uncovered during this other time, and be gone while their body is still again after having engaged in all of this movement. But movement is a huge part of achieving hedge crossing for many people. And it has very ancient roots in Northern practice. Drumming also is another technique that goes along with this. Often that movement doesn't happen in isolation. Even if you're just sitting and rocking or going side to side, it doesn't have to be drumming that's happening live and in person. You know, you don't have to be trying to maintain a drum beat while you're doing this. You could have somebody else drumming if you have other people with you, or you could be playing a drumming track from YouTube. There are several really excellent, like 3 and 4 hour long ones, even 8 hour long ones that you can find. So find something that speaks to you and that will help you. I find you want something that's really steady throughout the entire time that you're practicing, because it helps your mind not focus on the repetition of ups and downs in the music, but it's just sort of that steady beat throughout. And you find that with that steady bass line or that steady beat as a foundation, your spirit undergoes its own ups and downs throughout the process. Singing is another huge part of what comes out of the Northern tradition and that we see within witchcraft practice as it's described in England and on the continent in later times. So what we see is usually either a single woman or a choir of women singing or chanting or reciting something that's sing-songy in order to help anchor the person who is engaged in the trance work so that they sort of stay on track and don't get lost while they're in the other worlds, and then later to bring them back. And sometimes those are done by two different people or two different groups. So you might have a group that's doing the anchoring and keeping them on track, and then a single person who sings them home again. Now, I mentioned that it's women because in the Northern tradition, that's what it was, like always. Partially, the reasons for that are that the work of Seidhr and certainly the vulva was only ever associated with women's magic. There were other magics that were very much associated with men, but this particular work was associated with women's magic. That's not to say that men in contemporary witchcraft and even men in contemporary Norse practice can't use these same techniques. It's just sometimes they're given a slightly different name within the Norse practice, and within contemporary witchcraft, they're kind of one and the same. So it really, gender doesn't necessarily define what your magic is, or should be, or can be. But that's a different topic. So we see the use of chant and the use of song and the use of words in the form of guided meditation and that type of thing also being heavily employed within traditional witchcraft and contemporary witchcraft in lots of different ways. Also very often within those Northern tradition practices, the vulva herself or the Seidhr Kona herself may also have a recitation or a chant, a song that she engages in order to do the work that she's there to do. So once she or he is already there in that spirit world, they may have a song that they sing or a chant that they recite. Word weaving and song weaving is definitely a part of this. Another technique that we see is outsitting, which literally just means to go and sit somewhere outside, usually in kind of a wild place, so somewhere out into the woods or somewhere out onto a meadow or a big windswept plain or a cliff overlooking an area, somewhere where you've got something of a view, and to be out there on the fringes, looking at the world, allowing messages to come to you sort of visually as well, and allowing that to be one of the ways in which you engage with the other world and sort of sink into the other world. So I'm going to mention here that there are two ways that I have personally found really effective for both engaging in trance work and also engaging in invocation type work. One is accessing through the breath and one is accessing through the eyes. Breath work absolutely is very connected to possessory work and to trance work and to achieving altered states. Being able to control the breath, changing the pace at which you're breathing, and doing all of those things can absolutely help you achieve both of those outcomes. And then the same thing with the eyes, but it's that idea that you can go out through your gaze and that you can open them in such a way, and not just like physically open your eyes, but like open that window to allow spirit in for possessory work. That might be something that I have to write about more, just to be able to get the concepts in a little bit more communicable a state. Two other techniques that I want to mention are shape-shifting and then connecting with spirits, particularly familiar spirits. Those are both really common practices within Seidhr work and within hedge crossing for witchcraft. Within witchcraft, we often think of this as going into our fetch or sort of transforming ourselves into a fetch animal or other type of astral body and then journeying out that way. We see really great evidence of this in Isabel Gaudi's I Will Go Into a Hair chant, but and also in other places as well in terms of witchcraft usage. And within northern shamanism usage, it is everywhere. So, and the word for it is filgia, which is, I think, very associated with our word fetch, although I have not done the etymological research on that to verify. But I think their filgia and our fetch is ancestrally connected, we'll say. So with the fetch, or shape-shifting, so that we change our spirit body's construct to look differently, to be able to go out and access the other worlds. That's us as a spirit engaging in that way, but we can also engage with other spirits, and it's very, very common within that Northern European practice and within witchcraft practice to have a familiar spirit that acts as a guide and guardian in those other worlds. Sometimes it's a spirit that we meet along the journey, and sometimes it's a spirit that goes with us wherever we go. So don't be surprised if as you're engaging in that or thinking about your experiences, if that's been the case for you, or will be the case for you, has been the case for you, is gonna be the case for you. Okay, so finally that brings us to what's the purpose of all this? Why do we seek to go out? Why have Seidh Kona and Seidh Man and Volur in northern traditions, and why do witches in the past and today, why do we leave our bodies? Is it just for some spiritual sightseeing, or is it for some other purpose? And the answer to that is that there are a lot of different purposes for which we might do this. There are many, many reasons why we might do this. I'm going to list a few that are backed up by historical evidence and on both sides of that coin, right? So in the northern practice and in contemporary witchcraft practice. One is about wisdom and learning, and it's about going and finding wisdom in the other realms to be able to apply it to our own spiritual growth or to the growth of our community, to the growth of our group. So often we see here communing with, connecting with, seeking guidance from the gods, from an array of spirits. Another thing that we might do, and that we see done a lot in shamanic practices throughout the world, and this certainly applies to Northern European shamanism, and it also certainly applies to witchcraft practice, is the idea of soul retrieval or spirit rescue, but being able to help a person who maybe part of their spirit is lost in the other world, or all of it on some level, that they're wandering between worlds and that they're disconnected in that way. Connected to that then is the idea of physical healing. So sometimes it's for spiritual healing, sometimes it's for physical healing. Traditional peoples have often understood, more than our contemporary culture has bought into, the idea of a mind, body, spirit connection, and that what's wrong on a physical level has connections to what's wrong on a spiritual level. And so being able to go into those spirit realms to be able to find the source of the problem and to take action there is one of the healing modalities that's often used. It's rarely used in isolation, though, I want to say. I feel like I have to add that. You shouldn't only be relying on spirit work to take care of physical issues. You also need to do physical work. You also need to do physical work and treat yourself as a whole being, because you are also more than just your spiritual body. You are the physical body as well. Seidh Kona and Spey workers and witches have in common that we also go into the astral. We go into these other worlds in order to do magic to achieve purposes here. So it might be in those realms that we're actually doing spellcasting of some kind. We might be going there in order to affect other kinds of change besides just healing changes. And it could be for blasting, and it could be for blessing, and it could be for something that you wouldn't describe as either of those. So it really just depends on the person and what the goals are right at that time. But magic can be worked from those realms as well. And so sometimes that's what we're doing. And so then finally, we see that oracular work happening from within that trance state as a sort of question and answer session with spirits of the dead or with the gods, with whoever's dwelling in the realms in which we have projected ourselves into. Our body, still sitting in this world, is able to answer the questions of people around us that are there with us in circle, or there with us engaged on some level in the trance experience. And historically, people have done this for very practical advice, like when to plant and what the weather is going to be coming up, and also for more spiritual advice. So you see just sort of a range. Okay, friends, that's what I've got for us this time. So if you have questions, comments, ways that you've been engaging in this work, drop your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you here next Monday at noon. Bye, friends.